Welcome to the Royal Automobile Club on Pall Mall. We're here in the Seagrave room. I'm Jack Phillips, digital editor of Motorsport, and I'm with Joe Dunn, editor of Motorsport, and Derek Bell. This is a regular on the talk show here.
Yes, we've done it a few times, haven't we?
Today we're going to talk about mainly Porsche, obviously for good reason, because you've got your new tome about.
That's right. Can you see that all right?
Looks like you made Richard Hessenthal work quite hard.
Yeah, he worked very hard without me pushing him at all. I didn't know what it was really going to be like, and it was all their idea, you know. Philip Porter and Richard was dragged into it. And I think 2/3 the way through he's going, I don't know how this is a lot to do. And when he said there's 202 races, I went, oh my Lord. He said, I'm not sure that, can you remember them all? And I said, no, I don't know. Anyway, by the time we got through it, and then I got the roughs coming through, I go, okay, I can remember that. Well, I did not remember them, but I was much better at remembering the victories than I was the ones where we didn't finish, which weren't too many, because you don't often break down in a Porsche, which is rather nice.
No, unless you're at Sebring, I think. Unless you're at Sebring.
Unless you're at Sebring, yeah. But yes, exactly. Thank you. God, you've read it.
It's very good, it is, as well.
Yeah. Pardon?
So, it's very good.
Is it? I think it looks good, and I scanned it, and obviously, I've scanned through it the other night with all the people around, and then the other night, last night, and it is good, yeah. And I think the way they put it together, compiled it all, and presented it is fabulous.
Yeah.
How did Richard go about doing it with you? Did he come over to your house and sit down and?
He said, "I'm going to be there for 2 days." He said, "I'm going to be with you."
Tent in the back garden.
Yeah, no, I thought I was going to have to. We did it, and we did it all in sort of 3/4 of a day.
Right.
Because I get on with it all quite quickly, and I remember things, and of course the great thing, having worked with him on another magazine, as you well know, he does have a lot of stuff that I told him about over the years. So, and of course I guess he had seen the previous book, so he dropped into it so easily. I mean, he couldn't believe it. He got actually through it in one sort of from 10 in the morning till 5 at night, and it was all dealt with. But that wasn't, everything, and we hadn't got all the photographs, but we went through all the races, and more and more and more races.
There were some obscure races as well.
Yeah, there were some obscure ones, which sort of cropped. You go, really? Yes, you're right. There's some pictures in there, and I was going to, and I went, I don't remember driving that one with Mexicillo on the side. What with Mecarillos or something, the one with stripes on, Porsche, obviously. I couldn't tell you where I raced it. But there weren't many like that, because I was fortunately so much. The major stuff was Rothmans and Lowenbrow.
Yep.
And of course Gulf and the 917s and stuff, but my major career was Rothmans and dovetailing in with Lowenbrow in America.
Yeah.
And there were the races that obviously were the bigger ones and the ones that we were more successful in, I suppose.
And it all started at Goodwood.
Yeah, well, yes, with Porsche you mean.
Yeah.
It's strange, it is astonishing, isn't it? And that they actually brought the car to Goodwood for me to do a test with Ronnie Peterson and Peter Gethin in, I think, something like September 1970.
Yep.
Am I right?
I think
you
so.
might tell me it's the next month, but I'm not good at months, but I know it had to be that year. And I was talking to somebody in the last few days, because so many people have come out of the woodwork in the last week with a book coming out that, came along with programs from different races. Last night, Jack came along with 2 programs, one from my very first race in 1964. And he said they got the date wrong. It was Saturday the 13th, not the 14th. Sorry. Anyway, and which I won, in the rain that day. And I went down the entry list. I couldn't believe who was in the race that carried on and raced, through the Lotus 7 Championship and on into Formula 3. And then from that, he then had the next program. The only other one he had was of June 19. Actually, later on than June. It was the penultimate race meeting at Goodwood in '66, and I was in Formula 3, and there I was winning the race. And I went through the list of all the people that were in the race. Again, it was phenomenal, just who was in it, that I didn't know, but of course went on to be professional drivers, and it was just fantastic to see this stuff. So I actually got a copy last night, took it away with me afterwards, so I had it as a record. But going away from that, so it was strange that I should drive the 917 at Goodwood, my home racetrack, which I sort of used to fantasize around on the farm as I was hoeing the sugar beet, and sort of have this dream about one day driving at Goodwood, never knowing that I would ever race there, and then to drive a Porsche 917, which of course at those days, and nobody had heard of a 917 10 years earlier, But I mean, it was fantastic. The only disappointing thing, we don't have any photographs of that test, which seems unusual. And but then PR didn't matter in those days. And then, of course, on top of that, we didn't have any lap times. So I have no idea what lap times I did. And when I actually mentioned it to John Horsman, he said he didn't. And then the book he did called Racing in the Rain, there's nothing about the Goodwood test.
Oh, really?
And it was part of their history. And he's coming over to England in the next few weeks because they're featuring him and John Wyer at Le Mans this year. They're doing a tribute to the John Wyer era, which John Horsman was a major part of it. And so I'm going to have to really push him about it and say, you know, why did you choose me? I think probably the reason is that the story I heard was Ronnie Peterson was more interested in getting into Formula One, which I could understand, and because he was 5 years younger than me and Peter was more interested in going out with the girls. And John Wyer much preferred me because I didn't do either of those things. So, well, I did, but not that bad. It wouldn't let it affect my racing. And that was the story that came out of it.
Did you remember much from the day? Or?
Nothing, no. I don't remember how many laps we did, but we must have done, I should think we must have done 10 laps each.
Right.
And I'd love to know the times, because I mean, we were young, trying to prove ourselves in a really good, cracking current car. And, you know, on that place, you know, McLaren used to test their Can-Am cars, so, and Formula One cars used to test there. So for us, it would have been representative of some good times, because, I mean, you wouldn't remember, but you might know about it, but they often used to say to us in 71, can you have a go, do you think you can break the Formula One lap record?
Right.
And we were very close to it. I mean, I think we were quicker around Spa than Formula One. I did 160 mile an hour lap in qualifying there, which I don't think the Formula Ones went that quick.
No. Because Peterson would have been quite close to Formula One by that point.
But he was on the edge. He was right on the edge of it, wasn't he? But his great race was like 71 or 2, 73 something when he drove the BRM and won at Monza.
Yes,
and so they would have been that. But you know, we'd all been through the ringer by then. I mean, when we did this, we were sort of. I just finished 6th in the United States Grand Prix, finished 2nd in the Formula 2 Championship, and I had my first race at Spa in a Ferrari, and had my first Le Mans of my life for Ferrari as well. So, you know, there's a lot of activity going on in our lives, Peter, me, and also Ronnie.
Were you still dreaming of Formula One at this stage? It was still very much single stint, right?
We all wanted to do that. I mean, now these days, the guys don't get up into Formula One because they don't get the breaks, but the reason is people aren't getting injured all the time. And, you know, I mean, when we were out there in Formula One, I remember we tried to qualify at Brands Hatch in like 73 or 4, I remember in the 30s, and there were 36 on the grid, Formula One cars, or 32, and I remember a crash trying to go get a quicker time to get on the grid. Remember Jochen Mass saying to me, God, it's terrible when you actually are trying to qualify for a Grand Prix, not just, you know, sort of do well in a race, but to actually get on the grid. And it shows how bad the car was at the time, or how poor we were. But the beginning of the year, that year actually, I'm not rubbishing the 30s, because it was actually a fabulous car when I drove it previously. But I mean, Jochen and Carlos Pace on the front row of the grid in Kyalami with those cars, and by the time we got to the British Grand Prix, neither of us were qualifying.
Wow.
And Pace had left and gone elsewhere. But you know, that's the way it was in racing. You know, all the teams improve, and budgets and that sort of thing. And I think John, I know we're meandering off, but I think John was getting low on budgets and sponsors and things, and it reflected in our engines and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what do you remember of the 512? The Ferrari, especially compared to the 917?
Yes, well, it was nothing. I mean, the Ferrari was obviously, for me, it was a wonderful opportunity when Jack Swatters of Brussels offered me the drive. He had met me during my Formula One time, and he was one of Ferrari's main contributors financially, I think, as was Maranello here, to keep the old team going. And so when Jack, who I say, gave me my drive at Spa and then Kyalami, and then I did the whole of the Steve McQueen movie in his car, actually, although it was painted red for the race, for the film. But you know, Jacques was a major part of me being at Ferrari and sports cars, because if he hadn't offered me that drive at Spa, I'm sure Mr. Ferrari wouldn't have said, I want him in my team, because I hadn't proved myself. And the sickening thing, in a way, was that I just left Ferrari from Formula 1 and 2 at the end of 69, but I left mid-year, really, because they weren't racing. So they said, well, we'll add you a lot free, off you go. And I drove for McLaren at the British Grand Prix, for example, and other stuff. But if I'd still been with Ferrari, I'd have naturally gone straight into the sports car program, which I had no idea they were building. And I suppose from the time I was there in June, the last time, or June, early July, then they developed the Ferrari sports car, unbeknown to me, and of course bring it out. But it was, I mean, for me, it was obviously a mammoth car, because the only thing I'd ever driven was a Lotus 7. So to drive this car was pretty, and it was the most powerful car I'd ever driven in my life. But go to Spa as well for your first time. I don't know quite why they asked me to go to Spa, but it's a very challenging track. But all tracks were like that, so you never thought, oh my goodness, this is dangerous. You just said, I've really got to give it some here, and it was such a challenge. But the Ferrari itself was sort of, I always thought it was a heavy car, and it didn't have any. You had very little sensitivity through that chassis as it was. I mean, it improved in the later cars I've driven since then. They did something to give them more feel. But you come into corners, you go to turn the wheel, turn in the corner, it wouldn't respond, and then suddenly it would respond, and it didn't oversteer anything. It would just suddenly bite and go. But there was a bit of a delay there. With the 917, it was softer, as we all knew. It ran soft because of the chassis was fairly soft. So immediately you sort of turned in. They got a reaction from the 917, so you got going quicker.
I think I remember you saying before that the Ferrari was stronger, but the Porsche was far, far quicker.
Yeah.
It was interesting that you can feel that the Ferrari was that much tougher.
Yes.
Stronger.
Yeah, well, I didn't have much experience, but I had driven Formula One cars, and so I knew about stiffness and how the whole thing is that feel. I mean, sensitivity and how you react to what the car does, because it sends you a message. If it doesn't move, when's this going to happen? And then, it would start to turn. But then you get to know that's its characteristics, so you drive within that. And you know that when you come up to whatever you call it, you're down to Stavelot, when you're turning in there that it's not going to respond initially, but you just turn it because it is going to work.
Yep. And
then it starts to work and you go out, and so you're doing it sooner and sooner to get the power on, sooner to get out of the corner quicker.
Almost like driving a turbo.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, very much so. But not many people experience that.
No. Did you feel a lot of the 917 drivers they'll get to the end of the Mulsanne and they're basically driving with their fingertips because the car's all over the place?
I didn't have that.
The car was well sorted.
I was very, very fortunate that I drove the finite car, the 1971 car, which, and unbeknown to me until 3 months ago, I didn't realise Norbert Singer hadn't joined the team until the beginning of that year or during the end of the previous year.
Right.
And that car initially came out in '69. When I drove that car recently at Valencia, and that was another experience, which I'll tell you, you don't need to hear about that necessarily. But I mean, by the time I got in it, I mean, the long tail with Norbert's input and whatever else had happened with the chassis and the bits and pieces, it was fantastic. And I mean, my first drive was in the 917 at Goodwood, and then from there, we went, then I got the magic call, having been accepted by John Wyer later that day, or whenever. I got a call from Porsche, would I go to Hockenheim in December and test there and do some aerodynamic tests? Well, it was the long tail, it was at Hockenheim, which of course didn't have those funny chicanes in, the Clark chicane and the Senna chicane. But I mean, it was bloody quick, but you still had corners on it, and also the stadium. And we went, but we didn't use all the corners in the stadium. We just made the straight longer, and I came right the way into the stadium and picked up the sort of penultimate corner, went along the pit straight, turned right, and went out.
Yep.
But I was in a long tail, and it was piddling with rain. I didn't get in. They were filming all morning, and I got in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on like December the 16th. And it was foggy, it was raining, and it was cold. And I was supposed to be doing aerodynamic tests. I didn't say I can do aerodynamic tests in the rain, but you don't argue with them because you think they do know what they're doing. And I mean, I was sliding this thing around and having a well-controlled drive in it. I didn't for 1 minute strike me the car was dangerous, dodgy, or unpleasant. And I didn't even really know that it had been, because I'm too stupid to read motorsport and find out what was written about the race, because they didn't interest me. I was only interested in single-seaters,
right,
until suddenly I found myself with my bum in a 917. And when you actually look at it, you realise that that long tail was really a bloody good car, because then we took it to Le Mans and we were doing 246 miles an hour with it, and it was as stable as a rock. I mean, we took the kink flat. Not your first lap, but after just a few laps.
And
Is that still a record, 246 miles?
No, they did. Somebody did 250 in that French machine that they built just to do it, but then they only did an hour of the race and retired. So, which was unfortunate. I mean, other teams claim they went quicker. No, they didn't go quicker. Vic says sometimes he did 2 plus 246, but as far as I know, he didn't. All I know is that Norbert Singer said to me as we walked across the paddock at the end of the test day, or the 2 test days, to the finish, he said, "So how many revs are you pulling on the Mulsanne straight?" And I said, the maximum I saw with the different body configurations, although the front really stayed the same because it's welded on, as you know. So it's generally the rear. And I said, the most I saw was 8,100 revs, Norbert. So he said, that is good, because at 8.2 she blows up. And that's when I've told that story so many times, but it's totally true. And I thought, blimey, the Porsche are pretty close on everything they do. Whereas dear old Ferrari say, no, when the valves bounce, shift gear, that sort of situation. Different sort of character, totally. And then then we're walking across, and he gets his slide rule out, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm calculating a top speed. So la 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 la, and he said, allowing for tire growth, and he started to laugh. I said, well, what is it? He said, no, it's better you don't know, And I went, well, if we're going to drive this thing for 24 hours, I think we should know. So he said, allowing for tire growth, that's 396 kilometers an hour. And Norbert was never in the habit of telling lies. No. So that's 246. So whether you like it or not, it was pretty quick, and nobody else shouted they went quicker. No.
And there was another story of you at Le Mans with Norbert Singer and a man on a bicycle.
Oh, gosh. No, it wasn't Le Mans. That was Hockenheim.
That was Hockenheim. That was the same day.
That was the same day as when I drove in the wet, yes.
Right.
In the pouring rain, my first time in the long tail. And it was right, I'd said it was wet and foggy and damn cold. And it was really, you could hardly see. And all this fog was coming down in the trees. And so they went out, and it was really up-to-date technical stuff this was, but on the 2 straights, like coming out of the stadium, going back into the stadium, which was around that kink, now the Senna kink. As you came down there, they wanted to know how many revs you were pulling. Well, it was difficult for me to really tell when I was blinding rain, very rainy, bad conditions, and it was not exact, So they had a big box on the seat over there, or on the floor, which was a form of computer. But I had to switch it on, so I'm going down the straight, and as I passed this sort of light, flashing light, I had to press a button, and then as I passed the next one, I had to press it again. So they got that air. It wasn't actually when I pressed it that mattered, it was the fact that I pressed it for the period that it went through the beams. And they didn't want to raise paper, I suppose. So anyway, and that's how they so I was doing that in the rain, and it came to the end of the day. Initially it hadn't been that dark, but then the last few laps, and of course everyone was saying, we need there's a little bit more to go here, with a little bit more to go. And so I literally, it ended up being my last run, but it was right on the ring of 5 o'clock, which really was getting
December.
It's December, enough said. And I came down through the east curve and came out, and I was really honking on. I was just bearing left to go around the kink. And whatever speed, I was doing 175, and I have no idea but it was moving on. And just as I started to go through the kink, I suddenly saw this poor bastard on a push bike, and I saw his eyes going, oh gosh, and he was pedaling like fury to get out the way. He did, it was brilliant. Obviously, time I saw him, I guess I picked him up there, and just that last pedal made him move. But I remember vividly seeing his face and his eyes going, I come this way every damn day. And today I nearly got killed. I can imagine telling the missus when he got back to the house over his cup of tea, But it was close. But
that's not the only person that you appeared in the middle of the track. I remember there's someone else when you mentioned Steve McQueen earlier, but when you were filming and you were...
that was crazy. I told that story actually last night as well. People say, what was it like to work with Steve McQueen? And we worked together, all of us worked with him for 3 months, and he was an amazing character. And he loved cars. I'll say that before we get into that scene. But he loved cars. He wanted to race Le Mans. He wanted to race. He wasn't interested really in the film at all. All he wanted to do was have fun driving Porsches at very high speed. To my knowledge, he never drove the Ferrari. He might have done, but he never did when I was there, that I can remember. And but he just loved being with us. And if he walked in here now, he would come up and sit with us because you're journalists and I'm a racing driver, and we could just talk. And he'd sit there and just chat. Yep. And he wanted to be part of the team. He wasn't trying to be Steve McQueen. He wasn't trying to be an actor. The acting was nothing. I mean, he was just himself. And he always said that to us. He said, no, I'm just myself. Whenever you hear me talk, that's how I talk. And it was. That's why there wasn't much dialogue. I mean, most of it was just Steve looking, And presumably
you treated him just as a
just
driver
as a
as
driver,
well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, initially it was like, this is Steve McQueen, made the Bullet and the Great Escape and all this stuff. And we were a bit in awe. But he was so relaxed and spent time with us. And he didn't want to spend time with the other actors, although not many of them were really...
There weren't many actors.
There weren't many actors in it, as such. And of course, as the movie went on, John Sturdy said, I wish to goodness I'd used you drivers as actors, because there was no dialogue, so we could have just done the bit. I mean, Steve, more than half the time, he was asking us what we would do in this situation. So we would walk through and show him how we'd get in the car. And then the actor would go, I like that, I do that. You just do that, And you see John Sturdy going, oh, Lord, what have we got actors for? And just, even that thing we'll come back to your story, but even with the 2 fingers that Steve Ray, that he did, he came to me it might have been more than me, but I remember I'm the one that said it. And it doesn't really matter whether I did or not, and he came and he said, if I wanted to make an impression on another driver up there, like the guy that I'm competing against, how would I signal that, and I said, well, it's the sort of thing that we do in England. You can't really put a name on what it is. And if you raise your finger to somebody, it can mean, like, thanks, whatever because you carved me up on the racetrack or on the road and you're really upset about something. But it can be almost a sort of a, see you out there sort of, or it wasn't a thing of endearment, but it was something that was like a communication with somebody without appearing rude. Yeah. But it meant that you acknowledged them. And so he went and did it, and it was quite funny, really. It seemed odd because so many people said, what the hell was that? And only Steve was the only one in the whole film that knew what it was, and a few British people, actors, because I don't think it was used anywhere else in the world, But it wasn't like, the American one of raising one finger at somebody, which is pretty bad. This was not a bad thing to do, in my opinion. And I lived on the farm all my life, up to then, so I knew the guys. You see the tractor in the morning, they just go like that to you. Like, it was a sort of a signal of, not endearment, as I said, but just acknowledgement.
It made our cover.
Yeah. Yes, it did, didn't it?
Well, it's one of the most famous photographs of it, really.
The trouble, when I did it, I remember he was standing there many times as I came through, or sat wherever he was, behind the guardrail. I had white gloves on too, but sadly, I think I did, it didn't show as much unless somebody said, you look at his fingers. And so I saw him, and so I used to come through sort of doing that to him as I went through. And of course, when you look at it, it's unfortunately in rather it's hidden by the colour of the paint behind, but it is definitely. And it was quite, because there's a guy there, and you have, again, it's an acknowledgement. Every time I came out of Eau Rouge, there was this particular journalist or photographer I knew, and he had the camera up there, and I sort of, normally you might wave, but in this I just went like that, So, where were we before? You asked me about...
we were about to talk about him lying in the middle of the racetrack.
Yeah, that's right, which of course you've given the story away now, but can we cut that bit out? Yes, Steve wanted to be in all the action. And I guess it was in part of the film when they said, look, Steve, this is getting a bit dangerous. We don't need... David Piper had lost his leg or whatever, and I hadn't got burnt at that point, I don't think. But we want... we need some really fast stuff. And I remember having seen Grand Prix, which of course, was mostly Formula Fords and stuff, Formula 3 cars, juniors. I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, what a pity. And I remember seeing them I was actually racing Formula 3 at Monza when they were filming at Monza. And I went to look at the cars and went, blimey, I'm driving the same out there in my Formula 3 race, and there it was. And I remember when we started this film 2 years later, I remember saying to whoever it was, we've really got to make this lifelike. We want to be fast. We've got to go fast. Fortunately, the drivers were good enough to handle the car. I mean, the people that drove was Vic Elford, and there was, Joe Siffert and Dickie Atwood, and no end of us that I could... Pardon?
Brian Redmond.
Brian Redmond. And loads of people that were good drivers and could handle driving. And also, you need to go fast, and David Piper, bless him, but you need to go fast to keep your concentration, because every time you go up and you go, stop, go back and do that again, take 16, you know, you come through, get boring as heck if you went through off the pace. And thank goodness the cars we drove withstood it. I mean, nobody actually crashed apart from David. And that was, I suppose one had to happen. But I mean, you know, so in this particular case anyway, Steve was dragged away, you're going to be the director today, or that you're in that area. And at the end of our run down at the Ford chicane was John Sturgis, and then he would direct from there. So there was just Siffert and I was in the Ferrari and Joe was in the Porsche 917. And of course, he was driving for Steve in this case, and I was driving for Siegfried Rauch, who was the Ferrari driver, German Ferrari driver. And so we were coming down. You come out of Arnage and go storming down. It's very, very fast, and you're probably doing 150, 160 miles, or maybe more, down through the cutting, which of course still exists as part of the road, but the Porsche curves are in there now, which are still pretty demanding. And you just come through this cutting down into the White House. And the White House, as you came down to it, was a house on the left. So as you came down, you were facing it, and you braked, and you turned right, and then you went around, turning left in front of the house. So it was a bit of right and then left. But the left was the major part. And as you came out of there, of course, you would drift out to the edge of the road. And as over the years, or over 3-4 years, I don't know how long, but they had put a guardrail in. But the guardrail was back across the grass, maybe 6 feet. And so as you came out, as time went on, the odd car would pop off the edge of the road and run up, you know, 2 wheels or one rear wheel on the dirt, before electronics came in and ruined all that. And, you know, sort of just snake out a little bit. And by degrees, of course, every year they'd put a little bit more asphalt in that, you know, 6 or 8 inch groove on the side. So the right-hand side of the road with the white line, which had been down the middle, was now, instead of being 6 foot wide, was 9 foot wide on this side. So the white lines were actually not in the center of the total width of the asphalt. So we would be drifting out anyway. So this, and then storm up to the Porsche chicane, and then we'd slow down, and so on. And we'd done this run 3 or 4 or 5 times. And every time we came through, because you couldn't see anything until there was the house on the left. And then, you know, every time you suddenly, oh, there's a camera there, there's a camera there, camera there, that sort of thing. And this one, and I say, Joe and I always drove flat out because he was always pushing me. A, he was a better driver than B, he was in a Porsche 917, and I was fighting this bloody Ferrari. And so I would go through pretty damn nearly flat out, but to give Joe a bit of a thrill. So we came storming through, and he was a wonderful driver, a very sort of great character and personality driving. So we came storming through, and of course, as I came through, I clipped the verge on the left and drifted across the line in the middle of the road out to the dirt and the asphalt on the outside. And then as I came through, I went, oh my goodness, there's a cameraman lying on the middle of the road on the white line. And of course, that was fine. I carried on up the Ford chicane. Meanwhile, Joe was right all over me. And when we stopped, Joe jumps out of the car. He's as white as, literally was as white as a sheet. His moustache was twitching. And he leaps out, and of course we had face masks like that around there. And he gets out. John Sturgis says, so what's wrong? What's wrong then, Joe? What's the problem? And he said, there's some stupid cameraman lying in the middle of the road. He said, I didn't see him, and I was just pulling inside Derek to have a look, and I nearly ran over him, as you would pull out to have a look, make it better for the camera, not realizing this one would be in the middle of the road. So with that, Joe said, we can't do this, it's too dangerous. So John Sturgis on his little radio phones up, and he says, okay, Steve, would you come up here? So Steve turns up on his Husky and drives up, stops, and sort of casually leans against it and says, what's up then? And so he said, well, and Joe says, it's crazy, Steve. There's some fat cameraman's lying on the middle, the white dotted line in the middle of the road. It's absolutely ridiculous. I nearly drove over him. And I didn't know what Steve literally said, but John Sturgis said, so who the heck did you allow them, this photographer, to go there? And he said, well, of course I allowed him to do it. So he said, but who was it? And Steve said, well, it was me. And it was Steve that was lying on the white line holding the camera to get the shot he wanted. And he just trusted us enough that we wouldn't run over him or something. I don't know, I still don't make it out. I mean, it was sheer lunacy. But he got the shot I suppose he wanted. The trouble is, it's a cop, we came around the corner, gone. So I mean, it was about 3 seconds of shot, I guess, which you still see in the movie. I haven't seen it for a while, so I've forgotten. But there were lots of things like that where even the one going down Mulsanne Straight, when we had I was I was in the 917, in this case, overtaking a Ferrari being driven by, I'm not sure, because Joe wasn't there all the time, I was mainly. And I remember as I came up, it was a Ferrari, I was in the Porsche, we had a frame out the side of the car, on the end of which was a camera. And it was a big, as I said, they were big cameras on the end. And of course, sitting out there, with quite a big lens on it, but we measured it so that it actually, as I pulled along beside the Ferrari, and the Ferrari's in front of me, as I went along behind it, the center, this trip bar beside the lens, which you couldn't see, the trip bar would hit the bodywork at the back of the Ferrari, and at that point it would release a spring or a magnet, and the bar would sort of, which had been out here, would sort of suddenly swing back in behind my Porsche, and so it's from that position to that, and so as I went by, the camera would pick up the wheel and then the bodywork and the front wheel as I went by, and we had it really damn close. And the first time we tried it, we came up. We weren't doing 180 miles an hour, but we were moving on, obviously, because we all said we might. But we went on. The first time I actually did it, unfortunately, the first time I tried to do it, as I went up the straight, the pressure of air on the lens actually tripped it, because it was such a big pressure, and it came around. And as it came around, it went donk into position. The front of the Porsche went like that. I went, oh my God! And he knew when the front was up, sort of off the ground, not quite, but I didn't realize how light. I knew it was light because I could feel it, but by the time it had gone from there and hit the back, it sort of almost put my nose in the Ferrari. Fortunately, it did it before I'd really caught the Ferrari up, because it was just the air. So they had to strengthen up that make or break, or whatever you call it, and also put some weight in the front of right up in the front of the 917. They took out the the radiator cover, and then put some massive weights in there. So it was a real dream to drive.
Wow.
And it worked the second time. And when you see it on the actual film, any of you that watched the film after all these years, I went, oh, is that all? It was so unimpressive, because it's a CinemaScope screen, and it looks like I'm 6 foot away. But literally, we were sort of, I think, about 8 inches away from the side of the Ferrari as I went past it.
Yeah.
And it worked, and the camera swung round, and we carried on by, and you see the wheel, and then you see the front wheel, and that's it. So all that work, but we got double the money. We got $200 a day then.
I think
Am I right in thinking you got paid danger money as well if you were doing
I'm saying. Yeah, I
all
got
right?
200 for that instead of 100. But it was fun. It was great fun. It was great to and for me, it was 1970, so I had my thrill of Formula 2, Formula 1, which sadly didn't work out as well as I wanted. And there I was about getting into sports cars, but I was in this state of flux when I didn't know where I was going. Yet I was leading the F2 championship all over, with everybody in the world in it, basically up and coming people, although I suppose I was over the hill by then, because I'd been in it for 2 years. But I sort of come back into it. And I'd had my first Le Mans and so on. So it was actually not a bad time for me, but I wasn't really earning much. We weren't appalling money. We earned appalling money, but you didn't do it for the money. You did it for the love of driving wonderful cars.
And then from there, you kind of, obviously, when the 917 was outlawed, you then you won Le Mans in between.
Yes, with the Mirage development, yeah.
And then you drove 934, 935 Kramer Porsches.
Yes.
And then you even drove a 908-3 in 1980.
Where?
In 1980 as well, Dijon. That one.
Dijon too. I drove at Vallelunga, and I think I won there, but did that not show?
It did.
Oh, it did.
But cause the 908 in 1980 would have been a very old sort of car.
Well, they're all bloody old. And I was old too. I was 40, pretty much. But I was 42. I felt young. Gosh, think how old I am today. Anyway, I really remember very little about Dijon. And did I win it then?
I don't think so.
No,
you were with Siggy Bruin.
Pardon?
You were driving with Siggy Bruin.
Oh, right, yes.
But we'll skip over that and go on to the
I think I won at Vallelunga. And then I won at Brands Hatch too, in a John Webb race. And I remember he said to me, could you slow down and make a race of it? And I went, nobody's ever asked me to go slower. It's usually, will you hurry up a bit because you're lagging behind? And I remember thinking, no, I'm going to, how do you go slower? I know you lift off, but if you go slower and make a race of it, and then you get a puncture, or and you go, well, bloody hell, if I could have kept ahead, I could have got a minute had the puncture, gone in, changed tyres, and come out and still been leading. I mean,
Yeah.
all you want to do is win the races. You're not give a damn about what the fans think about it. Well, you know they're going to enjoy seeing a 908 win, or whoever wins, they're always keen. But for the driver to have to do it, so I ignored what John asked me to do.
And then you were back with Porsche with the work team, 936.
And the little GTR.
Yeah, the
that was the
94.
factory car.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
the year
do
before.
you still have your 94?
GTS, yes. I was out in it last night.
Really?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. It was last night, yeah. Yeah, we did a Porsche thing in Portsmouth last night. No, it was, it's still a great car, yeah. It's still, I took it out and drove, Sebastian and I drove to Portsmouth and back last night. And it really does tramp on. It's the most amazing thing. You're accelerating. It's the only car I've ever driven that normally to go faster, you press the pedal down and a bit more and a bit more to go faster and faster. This thing, you take third throttle, you get it up, second gear, third gear, and then you push the throttle just a certain way, and it's accelerating really well. And then it sort of goes, and your foot hasn't moved, yet the thing is just rocketing. It's the only car I've ever driven that has
70.
that sensation. Pardon?
Up to 70.
Yes, up to 70. It was on the farm roads, actually.
But that 1981 win, come back to that, was there any pressure?
1981 win, well, it was, to me, was very, very important because I was about to retire in the year before. And because I'd had a pretty good run, I wouldn't say I was at all satisfied with my career at all. And I didn't consider I'd done anything, that good. I won Le Mans once, and I'd, won lots of Formula 2 races and Formula 3, but it wasn't, I didn't feel satisfied at all. But I couldn't carry on the way it was. And then out of the blue, that's when Steve O'Rourke phoned me and said, would I drive with him the whole season, initially in the Lancia? And I said, let's meet and talk about this, because I don't think we should run a factory-entered, or what was a factory-entered Italian car, because I don't think it's going to be any good when they get no assistance. I said, you run a BMW. I said, I know we can get help from BMW, and they would like to achieve something. So I said, we won't win anything, but we'll always be there.
Yeah.
So we were at the first race at Monza, and I don't know where we qualified, where we should have qualified, And with Steve O'Rourke, I think David Hobbs was in that race. If not, he certainly was at Silverstone, the next one. And while I was there, Valentin Schaefer comes up to me, who's the turbo man from Porsche, and who I'd been with before. And he said, so what are you driving, young? And I said, I'm driving the M1. He said, what are you doing at Le Mans? So I'm driving the M1, because, I've got a contract for the year. But in those days, Porsche just did one race a year, and that was Le Mans, which is great if you want to do one race a year and can go off and sell houses and property, and you're very wealthy. But if you've got to sort of pay the bills, you can't just go off and just do Le Mans. And the money isn't good enough to just do Le Mans anyway. It's the fact you're winning it. And so I said, I'd love to do it, Valentine, but I've got this contract for the year. So that night at dinner, Steve O'Rourke says to me, who was a great friend of mine, became a super friend. He said, who was that you were chatting to? I told him Valentin Schaefer, I told him the conversation. And he said, no, if Porsche wanted you, I'd be flattered to think they wanted my driver. I went, wow. And I went to bed that night, the night before the race, lying in bed going, I'm going to win Le Mans. I know I'm going to win Le Mans. It's the only time I've ever sort of dreamt. No, I wasn't dreaming. I was like fantasizing about the fact. It was just like premonition. I was going to win it. Anyway, but it's the only time, and it stuck with me forever because I just knew. And the next day I think something went wrong, and Steve pulled off in the kitty litter or just stopped in it. I don't know, there was a problem. And so on the Monday I phoned up Manfred Janka, and he said, that is very good, Derek. Now I have the two best drivers in the world. You will drive with Jackie Ickx. I went, whoa. I didn't know they rated me at all. I thought I might drive the second car with somebody, so that was very exciting. Then I thought, I've got to sort this out with Steve, haven't I? So I went back to Steve. I went and met him in London. I came up to town, and he said, let's talk about it. So we did, and he said, no, I would be honoured, I said, for you to drive for Porsche. So I did. And, Jackie and I say we never lifted the bonnet up. We'd never sat in the car till we got to Le Mans. And it was just fantastic.
Just cruise to finish.
Yes, nearly. Yes, we did. I read 15 laps in the lead or something.
You mentioned Jackie Ickx there. I wanted to talk a bit about your partners and what makes a great teammate, really, and whether there was a quality which you see running through all of your teammates over the years.
No, there wasn't really a quality, because running through them, they were just totally different characters. And I think I changed as a driver over the years. I was always in awe of Jackie, because he was like in Formula 2 when I was in Formula 3, and he won the Nürburgring German Grand Prix in a Formula 2 Tyrrell, Matra. And I always held him in awe, because he was just so amazingly quick, good, never seemed to get into trouble, and just had something about him, that red star all across his back, you know. And he should have been my world champion, without a doubt, in Formula 1, but he was in the wrong place, the wrong time, whatever. But I think what he did for me was that, I mean, he asked John Moir, could he drive with me at Le Mans? He wants to drive with me, I can't believe this. And because I saw the letter he wrote to John Moir, and because I never imagined he'd want to drive something like that. So that was the way it was, and you know, as I say, we never sat in the Mirage. I don't think he even tested it until he came to Le Mans, but he might have done. It was very easy to drive, the Mirage. But you know, it was just special that he, you know, the Mirage particularly, he wanted to drive, and then again with the Jules car, he was then the driver, and I came out of the woodwork and was his teammate. And I think I just learnt, I don't know what there's something in, you know, that sort of subconsciously you pick up from people like that. You see the way their attitude, the way they go about it. There's no heroics, there's no shouting, there's no screaming and whooping it up and that sort of thing. Ooh, what's this? You just got on with the job. And I would say we very rarely had to discuss what we were going to do through the whole of the time we raced together. I mean, obviously we had a problem. We'd say, well, maybe we should do this or that. But I remember when, even with the Mirage, John Wyer had a driver's briefing, and I think Howden Ganley was in the other car with maybe Vern Schuppen, but I honestly can't remember. We had like a driver's briefing, I think. And I think they might have, did they have 3 drivers in the other car? It doesn't matter. We had a driver's briefing of the team. So this is, remember, the first time I'd finished 4th the year before. And literally Jackie and I walked in, he looked at us and with all the other drivers there, and he said, you two can go away, you know how to win. And I went, I've never won, how the hell do I know how to win? You know, I walked out a bit mystified. I wanted the real lecture on what to do and that sort of thing, which I'd read about in all the books. So that was it, and with Jackie we just got on and did the job. And as people say, well, what did you say to each other? Well, we never talk, because he's getting out as I'm getting in, you know, pat it on the back and get out, you're in the way. So we never discussed anything until afterwards, and then he was never one to show great emotion. I mean, I don't know if I was really that excited either. At the end, it's such an anticlimax when you've won. You know, I mean, it isn't. You win and it's like, oh my God. But you're so tired, and there's 2 of us driving it, you know, until 1984. Yeah. It was really, and I never thought about it as being tough, because I always just understood there was 2. And one year, I think it was 83, Jackie said, it's time we had another driver. And I said, but who? He wrote me a letter, I remember that. I wish I'd kept all those things. Yeah. He wrote me a letter and said, I think it's time we had a 3rd driver, because I think it's getting very wearing. And I think that's so typical of him, because he had analysed that we were getting, the cars had more G-force and that sort of thing. It was getting more tiring. And he'd figured it out, whereas I never thought about it. I'd just gone and drive it, and I'd get more tired and more tired and more knackered, you know, and sweat more.
Did you have the same relationship with Holbert?
Very much, yeah.
But then I guess the opposite for Beloff.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Stefan, I was put with him really. I had an option of another driver and Stefan Beloff. And I said, no, I want to drive with Beloff, right, because I knew he was very, very fast. I'd never heard of him crashing particularly. And he wasn't really a crasher, but he had a couple in my time, which tragically ended in a nasty finish for him. But I mean, he was just electrifyingly fast. And they basically put him with me because they thought that I would sort of calm him down a bit. And so I'd call him son and he'd call me father. And as I said again last night, I mean, if you ever see a picture of us, nearly always we were laughing. Yeah. I mean, he was such a fun kid. He wasn't serious about it. He wasn't intense. You know, I mean, he just wanted to drive and drive very fast. But my big regret is that nobody got hold of him and said, hey, you know, calm down a bit. You're really a brilliant young driver, but you need to be controlled and graded almost up into being a top driver.
Did you feel you had that sort of relationship with him, that father and son relationship in reality?
I don't think so, no. But no, I don't think so. I mean, he didn't sort of say, "You're right, lad," you know, none of that stuff. I mean, he was a man and he was bloody quick and he did a heck of a job. Yeah. But the only problem with all his wonderful driving was that he used too much fuel. And I get in the bloody car for the second hour and I'd sort of go off, and of course for the first lap I could let it rip, and then they'd come on the radio and say, "Hey, Bell, turn the mixture down, turn the boost down, drop your revs from 8 down to 7.6 and take it easy." Because Stefan, in all his electrifying laps, you know, had used a lot of fuel, which was great for the fans, but it wasn't much good for me because I droned around like an old fart, you know. So I go, "Oh God, thanks, Stefan, it was really good." But we had some great races. I mean, nonetheless, I mean, it wasn't as bad as that, but we had some quick races, and I don't think I let him down. I, you know, backed him up pretty well.
Do you think there were signs that he was kind of beginning to understand endurance racing a little bit more?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I just couldn't understand the moves that he appeared to make on Jackie at Spa, which were unnecessary. And I've only ever seen the in-car, Jackie's in-car, and believe me, I sat there and watched it with 2 other drivers at Porsche. And Jackie, and honestly, I'm not standing up for him in any way at all. He just kept to his line the whole way. He didn't move across the road. He didn't do a Senna and dart across. He just sat there and brake down on the braking line. And to give the guy the chance, anybody who wants to, except for that one corner, which you never would look in your mirror to see if anybody was daring to be stupid enough, because literally you turned into that Eau Rouge flat. I mean, we took it 8 times out of 10, we took it flat out.
Really? Even?
Oh yes, oh yeah.
You brake on the way up, or?
No, you never brake.
Just lift? Or?
You just lift at the bottom just to set it, and off you go. And if you got halfway around, you do it at the bottom because there were no identification marks. There wasn't like a yellow mark in the road. I mean, you were in the middle of the track coming down past the pits, a little bit to the right, but there was nothing because the pit entrance exit came out, and you were left with another 20 feet of asphalt, which you left because you weren't going to go out there. So you came across to the pit exit, and at a certain point, whichever was your judgment, you turned left, went across, picked the left apex, the right apex, and you drifted out to the outside. If it didn't quite work, you would just feather, just a back on, and that was enough, but there's enough to slow you down.
Yeah. But
you could hear the cars and how many went through flat, and you couldn't do it every lap. It was uncanny. It was just an amazing thing.
Wow.
It's the most tricky corner in the world, that, without a doubt.
Harder than Bernardville and...
Yeah, Bernardville's easy. Basically, it was only one way.
It was just a
You just go round it, don't you? I mean, it's bloody fast entrance, but I mean, if the car's good, you can do it quicker, and if it isn't good, you're in a you don't.
You're sort of battling yourself.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, you have to. I mean, Eau Rouge, you have to be on the right side of the track, which of course has changed quite a lot now. You had to be on the right side, but not against the guardrail. So you were 10 foot out, because you'd be going almost across. You'd be going like that to go in, which is crazy. But you'd be going out there, and at a certain point, you'd do that to pick up the apex, straight onto that one, and up over the top, and then clicking the left, and then clicking the right as you went out. I mean, all those you had to get right. And if you didn't get it right from the beginning, then there was nothing to tell you were right, apart from a gut feeling, I ain't getting around here.
So then, win 3 came, as with the 956 at Le Mans.
Yes.
How different was that to the 962? Because that's a question from Jamie Smith has asked as well.
Again, it's strange, you know. We all went testing that Mirage. We went testing the 956. Jochen, me, and Jackie went testing at the beginning of that year in January, 1983. Right?
3, yeah.
1982, first year.
Yes, sorry.
And we all went testing, but we'd never driven I had never driven the 936 there. So all I had was my experience the year before in the 936. So when we went with the 956, I couldn't say, wow, I was much quicker around that corner. It was like, wow, this is quick. The last thing I'd been there with was the GTR, the 924. And I spent hours testing there. But you obviously, the thing is about ground effect, you don't have anything violent about it. It just goes around quicker than a conventional car. There's no change, it's just that it's got more grip. It doesn't do anything. I mean, it breaks away a bit sharper if it does, because it does one of those, but really the car was very stable. And so I must admit, I've talked to Jackie about it the other week, actually, when we were at Monaco, and I said, do you remember? I said, because he's not good at remembering. He doesn't want to remember actually, but the past. But I think there was no great reaction from any of us apart from, my goodness, it's quick. And they were all trying to go quicker than each other, as you would, just to show you're the best.
Yeah.
And that was it, to be honest. Yeah. And then you got the 962, which came along, but that was different again. And it wasn't just the fact that we had the wheelbase was a little longer. It wasn't just that. When they came along, they had different tunnels on it, and then inevitably we ended up with taller wheels and narrow wheels to get more tunnels.
Yep.
And then we went up from 2.6 litre engine to a 2.8 to a 3 litre to 3.2. So, and bigger turbos and whatever else you want to throw at it. So every time we went out, it was quite dramatic. And of course, we went PDK and all these other things they wanted to test.
Yep. Well, I'm running out of time, I'm afraid. We'll have to
really?
rattle through.
Am I talking that much?
Rattle through some more questions, I'm afraid.
Before I just wanted to ask about the downforce and the increased speeds. Was it take it out of you physically more?
Well, I think
as your career progressed, as the cars did.
I would say probably yes. I mean, I was led on after that 83 race that Jackie and I lost a lap on the first lap when he got punted off. We drove through, and I got back in the lead at 6:15 in the morning, and then the engine stopped. So there's me as not a chief mechanic, but the only mechanic available, and I had to change the sensor on the flywheel, I had to change the distributor cap or something else, and I had to change the coil and the sensor on the flywheel and change the ECU. And you did all those things, and it started, so I guess I achieved something. But it wasn't easy, at 6 o'clock in the morning doing anything. But I mean, that was pretty tough on both of us, I think. And then we struggled through it all the time, remember. We made a lap up in that 14 hours, which you say, really, is that all? But we didn't use any more fuel than the others because we were on the same number of laps. Yeah. So we overtook everybody, but and had on the same fuel. And it doesn't sound much when you say you were 8 miles behind and then you made it all up. It's quite a long way at Le Mans. And it's going to go into Mulsanne and then it stops again. So I had to do that number on it, got it back to the pits, and then Jackie took over. And then I think around about 11 o'clock, something like, I used to lose time, what time it was later in the race, because you didn't sleep really. And I remember we then had an oil cooler split, and they had to change the whole oil cooler, which took time. It wasn't just one part or a line; it was the whole bloody thing. And then we got going again, and we were still, around a lap or a lap and a half behind until then we had no brakes, and they wanted to change the discs, and Jackie wanted the disc change, and I said no, leave it. The options to go slower, I said I'll go slower, and didn't. But we made it work, and I think I got the fastest lap of the race in the last hour.
17 seconds.
Pardon?
17 seconds.
Was
the
it?
gap
Was it?
Between you and Holbert.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
Did you think you were going to win it?
Oh yes. If it had been another lap, yes, because they had such a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, and ours was running like a dream. I mean, such like a dream, you couldn't stop it.
Yeah.
But it was running perfectly in every mechanical sense, except for the brakes weren't good. But to be honest, I used the brakes like hell. Had to, didn't you? Doing 235, you've got to use something to slow down. But you probably used the transmission a bit more than normal,
right?
Because we had to take the risk with it. But I just kept thinking that every time I went down Mulsanne Straight, that if I got heated the brake discs up with my left foot,
so
they might, put my left foot across, but not obviously wanting to lose time, but pushing too hard, but putting some heat into the discs, being really a top engineer here, that the discs would sort of glue together, so they would expand, because when things get hot, they expand. And I hoped, rather than chuck bits out, that they might just gel that bit of heat might just hold, rightly or wrongly, and no engineer's ever said, well, you're clever, Derek. But they haven't said I was a prat either, so they just look and go, really?
So we'll move on to 88.
Yes.
I think I've spoken to you about this before, Ludwig.
Oh, God, my car downstairs, yes.
Yeah.
That was so unfortunate. Everybody says we'd have won the race. I think we would, which would have been lovely to have won it that year. But Klaus, I saw Klaus last year. I hadn't seen him for 5 years, and he's got a little bit chubbier than he was. He looked very fit, And every time he saw me, he said, "I'm still regretting that I did that day. I'm so sorry." But that's life. We make mistakes. I'm just glad I never made a cock up like that when I was that I'm aware of. He just must feel terrible, because we both said, just keep him out of the bloody car. We'll drive the rest of the race without him, But it was a great, great pity, because it was a tough race with Jaguars and everything out there, and we just lost. We just didn't quite make it.
But then the year before, you'd won Le Mans and lost your drive in the same sort of 2 hours before the race finished. You've been told that Porsche was pulling out of racing.
Yes.
Yes. So what was that like?
Well, being told at that point.
2 hours before the finish.
Well,
to take a fifth win.
I just put my head around. I mean, we actually knew they were going to pull out. They had to at some point, and I was very disappointed. But what can you say? You just get on and drive it. You're there to win the race.
Yep.
And the emotions don't come into it. I didn't drive around going, "Oh, this is the last time."
Make it last.
It almost wasn't, but
Yeah.
But it was, because we still drove the Urst car in '93, didn't we?
Yes. And related to that, Jamie Smith has asked if you ever got to drive a Porsche-engined IndyCar, because obviously they were leaving to...
No, they never got us near that.
Okay, that's that.
Yeah, they must have done it here, I suppose. But, they had some good... I don't think Jackie ever drove it, or Stuckey, or anybody like that, no. It was purely the Americans that got in the IndyCar.
Right.
And the Formula One, I have no idea, because it was run, was it Arrows Formula One? Was it the Porsche? Then they ran it, was it?
That was after McLaren, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Anyway, so no.
Not too sure. Okay. So to finish, this one might take a bit longer to decide, I think, because we've got two quick questions to finish. Piers Ruthven has asked, 1 car, 1 lap, 1 circuit. What would it be? If you could pick 1 car to do 1 lap, what circuit would you do it?
And you mean?
I guess it would have to be a Porsche.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a Porsche.
Yeah.
Because off the record, I would say a 333 SP Ferrari.
Right.
Because it was a Formula One car. Now, I think the quickest Porsche I ever drove was right at the very end. And I know we went testing at Brno the year in 1994, which was going to be the last race I did for Porsche. And the car, it was beginning of flat bottoms. And I remember it didn't work at Le Mans test weekend. The whole lot was vibrating and bumping, and that was it. So I was really upset about it. Yeah. So we went to Le Mans for the test weekend, and it was a disaster. But it wasn't a factory team. It was Kramer. And then we went away and tested at Brno, and they offered me a sort of an inter-series Porsche 962. It was an open cockpit car, and the body was fully enveloping almost, except for no roof. And that was the most amazing car I ever drove. It had so much power, and of course it didn't have everything duplicated. It just literally had one of this, one of that twin turbo, but everything was made lighter and lighter, and that was astounding, absolutely unbelievable.
And which circuit would you take it to? Watkins Glen?
Well, no, I'd take it probably to Spa.
Old Spa or?
Well, no, the present Spa, I think.
And related to that, Jacob has asked, 1 car, 1 circuit, 24 hours, and 2 teammates. Who would they be?
That's really difficult, but I only ever drove with 2 teammates, which was Stuck and Holbert, and they were a wonderful pairing. To have the 3 of us, I think I think those 2 were the best pair.
So you would mix Holbert and Hicks?
I would do very easily, yes, and I would mix Stuck and all that group I would have in a car, yes. So you make a good foursome.
And that would be in a 956?
No, 962.
So you could take 2 962s.
Pardon?
You could take 2 962s, have Al Holbert in one and with Jackie Hicks.
Oh, I see.
And you could just do 2 stints, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
That'd be ideal.
Yeah, exactly.
And this book is out now?
It came last week, yeah.
It's available now for people to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe.
Okay.
I mean, it must be.
Yes.
I know journalists have got it, various journalists, and there's a stack sitting there. There was a stack the other night, so I'm sure, but I haven't got one yet.
Right. I think you can buy it on our shop as well, I believe.
Oh, right.
Oh,
good.
If you need a copy, visit our shop. It's well worth a read, as hopefully this podcast showed. Okay. So thanks for joining us.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Alan. We'll be back soon for the next talk show. We have a very good guest lined up, so that should be not too long to wait. So we'll see you then.